Signs of the Southland for the 17th of July, 2023. Mr. Grant, Mr. Purdy, we have a lovely interview with Leighton Truder after the break. But first, let's talk about Chris Eubanks at Wimbledon. Mr. Purdy, how did he do?
Well, last week we had mentioned how we beat Tsitsipas in the round of 16 to make the quarterfinals. And they played last Wednesday, so that was 5 days ago. And he was playing Daniil Medvedev, the next best guy in line before Djokovic and Alcaraz, and that went to 5 sets. And right at the fifth set started when he kind of started tailing off. He had a crap ton of winners, though. I think he has somewhere in the highest number of winners, if not the most winners, through that round in a Wimbledon history so far. He was serving out of his mind, even against Medvedev as well. Sadly, I was on the way to Nashville and missed the party that Georgia Tech, the Institute, threw at Coda to watch that match. It was a 10 a.m. match, and so everyone's already on campus working. That's there in the summer, and so they used the big screen there. If you haven't been to Coda, they have a little courtyard and they have this super super wide screen. And so apparently from a friend of mine who was there, they said near the end of the match there was 400 people there. So it was a serious crowd for a Wimbledon as big of a Wimbledon watch party as Atlanta's probably had in a long time.
You win that on a technicality, James.
Very very specific thing there, but I mean it was. I think it was really cool just to see that was happening, and Eubanks was able to get a lot of home support based on the articles I read and just how his response was. He was deservedly shocked at the amount of response coming, but he was saying this is the best tennis he's ever played. So. And everyone does have the chance to see him this coming weekend. He is playing the Atlanta Open, which happens. Shoot. Yes, he is playing Atlanta. He is not playing the Newport tournament, which is on grass, so he's going to play hard court this weekend instead. I will not be here, so I will not be watching this, sadly. But if you're in town, definitely go to the Atlanta Open, because there's already a lot of cool players that come usually. So if you haven't been to the Atlanta Open, it's a fun little tournament. Yes, it gets a little hot because there's no roofs and it's at Atlantic Station. But if you want to see some pro tennis for not that expensive, that's your opportunity.
Your only requirement is to root against John Isner. But just to circle back onto Chris Eubanks for a bit, a couple of notes that came out of the tournament. I wanted to mention that he had Medvedev on the ropes. They went to that fourth set. I think it was a fourth set tiebreak, right? No, it was the fourth set tiebreak. He had Medvedev on the ropes going, and it took a Herculean effort for Medvedev just to send it to a tiebreak in that set, because Eubanks was 2 up and serving well, and then Medvedev started to see the serve and position himself properly. I think the announcers made a really good point about Medvedev moving in closer so he could get more power on the returns and more direction.
Yeah.
And it was just sort of a Pyrrhic victory from there, or moral victory. Moral victory is the word I want to use.
He won that fourth set tiebreak 7-4, but then 6-1 in the fifth set. So it was after that tiebreak that was the emotional.
Yeah, that was
it. Seemed.
Yeah, it was it's one of those just very emotional sets, and it's just hard to come back from. The other note is he's up to, I think I saw 31st in the ITP rankings. ATP, one of the ranking systems. I'm going to get the college and the professional ones confused because we talk about
ITP, ATL.
Just Atlanta born and bred.
Out there, you'll get there eventually. Exactly.
But he is up to 31st in the men's professional tennis rankings, whatever they are called. So there is
the ATP rankings.
So there is some. So he's. That's just over 2 tournaments, right? He won in Mallorca, and then he went to the quarterfinals of Wimbledon. Yep. He's now well into the top 100. So I think, Jake, you were saying he gets Wimbledon tickets for life for free or something like that?
Top 8.
You I was talking to about
top
this?
8. Yeah. I think it's for life, yeah. That's a big deal on Twitter. I don't know why I'm still on that app, but that's how I remember that Clayton was writing a new book. So, I guess it's not all bad.
We'll get there. Couple more news items. Don't spoil my segues, my guy.
That's my job. That's my job. It's been a long time of us doing that. Come on.
Woof. Let's head over to the basketball court real quick. Ibrahim Asako of Guinea has signed a grant in aid to come to Georgia Tech. He was a 6'6", or he is a 6'6" small forward from Markham, Ontario. He's one of the best three prospects from Canada. So another seems like a big prospect for Damon Stoudemire as he
Yeah.
begins to put together his inaugural season roster. Jack, do you have any more on this one?
The recap that Tech posted, that Stoudemire said that he liked his defensive ability, which certainly would be a welcome sight for us after last year in some of those games. And he likes his scoring ability, which is good. So I mean, if he's 6'6", small forward, that's the kind of frame that you wanted. You wanted that guy to be versatile. He's going to be that specific frame and play that position anyways, and definitely play defense if you're going to be on the forward spot. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. I haven't looked too much into his stuff and whatnot, but yeah, he's from Guinea and then was playing high school ball at a prep school in Canada over the last year or so.
Someone in our writers room made a comment that Stoudemire was a pretty small player in his day compared to the normal NBA, but now he's just recruiting massively tall dudes.
Yeah.
Which is just it's a great bit of irony. But I think one of the things that we've commented on historically about Georgia Tech men's basketball is that they lack size. They lack definitive size, right? So
we will be dunking the basketball this year. That is a thing we didn't really do this past year was dunks. When we had Moses Wright, there was just dunk after dunk every game.
Moses Wright
and
Jordan Usher too had a lot of dunking ability, but yeah, that definitely not something that's been in Georgia Tech's game for a while now. Our final news item: Carson Kim from Yorba Linda, California, has committed to Georgia Tech golf. According to the junior golf scoreboard, he is the number 3 ranked junior golfer right now. He was originally committed to USC, and then USC made a coaching change, so now he's here. The last note that we have on this, because obviously it's golf, so not a lot of information. He won all of his junior President's Cup matches. I will be the first to admit, I don't really know what the President's Cup is or what the Junior President's Cup is, but I assume Jack knows.
Yes, that is it's so how the Ryder Cup is U.S. versus Europe. The President's Cup is U.S. versus everything that isn't Europe.
They could have found a different name for that, I feel like.
So you usually get a lot of Aussies and some South Africans and Koreans. That's generally how those rosters get made up, and some Japanese players.
Makes sense. I think that's about it for news. Mr. Grant, would you like to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. Those who have been listening to our podcast I was going to say we didn't interview you that long ago, Clayton, but I guess it's been at least like 2 years because Jack definitely was not around. And it's been at least a minute. But for those that don't remember, we have today Mr. Clayton Truder. He of the, dare I say, anthology of Atlanta professional sports, Loserville, back yet again to talk about another book. Clayton, how you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for the kind words about Loserville, and I appreciate you guys all looking into it. Yeah, I'm glad it's perceived that way now. That's awfully nice.
I mean, top to bottom, there's really nothing else that does quite what it does. So I got to give you props for that, and I want to thank you for coming back on. But new book. It's not Atlanta, but what's the hook?
It's not Atlanta. It's a Boston book. I lived in Boston for many years, and that's where I came up with the idea for it. It's called Boston Ball. Rick Pitino, Jim Calhoun, Gary Williams, and the Forgotten Cradle of Basketball Coaches. When I was living in Boston, I realized that kind of low-key, 3 different Boston basketball programs, all at the same time during the 1980s, had coaches that ended up in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Jim Calhoun coached at Northeastern, which everyone called Northwestern at the time. You had Rick Pitino coaching at BU, and you had Gary Williams coaching at BC. They all went elsewhere to bigger programs and had fantastic careers. So I got the idea to write a book that talked about all 3 of these guys, their emergence as coaches happening simultaneously, how they developed their approach to recruiting, their strategies on the court, and how it in many ways differed greatly from what was happening in college basketball at the time. These are all guys that adopted very much a run and gun, pressing, trapping kind of attack. College basketball by the end of the 1970s had become very big man dominated. The problem was these guys were all coaching in fairly small programs and couldn't lure Bob Lanier or Artis Gilmore or Bill Walton to come there. So they built around small guys and played very aggressive styles of basketball, which had not been seen for many years. That, in many ways, had been the style of basketball in the northeast corridor of the country, dating back to the 30s. But as the big man emerged as the centerpiece of college basketball, that style dissipated a bit over time. They helped bring it back, and in many ways, this is an origin story for modern college basketball, because all of those coaches adopted this style in their jobs at UConn with Calhoun, for Pitino in several places, and with Gary Williams at Maryland. They all played very aggressive styles of basketball, and it led them to 6 national titles, 14 Final Fours, and over 2,500 wins among the 3 of them.
Nice. That sounds like a great synopsis of the book. It's not out till November, correct me there?
November 1st. You can pre-order it now, and I can provide you information on getting a very nice 40% off discount much later in this process.
I was going to say we'll do that at the end, but and we appreciate the synopsis in advance, because that's how we turn listeners into buyers. But how'd you go from Atlanta and all the time you spent on Loserville? If I recall, that was your master's thesis? PhD
it was my
thesis?
doctoral dissertation. It took a decade to do that.
Whew.
Okay, yeah. So how'd you go from writing a real thick book to the Cradle of Coaches and writing a book about Boston basketball? Because it feels like it's been a quick turnaround here.
It's all because of COVID. I turned in the final version of Loserville on June 1st, 2020, and there was still a lot of being at home at that point. And I got the idea that I wanted to write another book, and if I didn't start immediately, I would never do it. So I pitched my agent on this idea, and he got me a book contract, and I got to work. A lot of the interviews were thanks to LinkedIn, basically, because these guys are all college graduates. A lot of them are professionals. So I didn't have a LinkedIn account. I signed up for LinkedIn and I started looking for people. And I ended up doing nearly 100 interviews for the book with former players at the 3 schools, coaches, staff members, media people. I also made a big point of talking to opponents of these schools too. I talked to somebody who had played against all of BC's Big East opponents at the time. I talked to somebody who played against all of Northeastern and BU's opponents in what was called the ECAC at that time. ECAC North evolved into America East. So I wanted to get a more global perspective on these teams, as opposed to simply them telling me about themselves. So I was able to talk to a lot of people very quickly, and the book's been done for like a year. It's just waiting for the publication day to happen. That's
exciting. I'll save my related question for the very end, because I feel like it segues us out a little bit better. I take it you weren't working on them at the same time, but it sounds like you clearly must have taken some aspects of what you learned writing Loserville, probably more about writing a book than about like Atlanta sports, taking it over to Boston. But what are some of those things that you were able to say oh, the second time around I'll know to do this, or something like that?
I think just structurally having a sense of how to build a story was part of it. That Loserville was a lot of kind of discrete parts. Some of it was topical, some of it was chronological. Figuring out how to tell the story, I think I learned a lot from Loserville. Also the research process, also being used to interviewing people. And particularly a lot of older people. I mean, when I did Loserville, most of the people I talked with were in their 70s and 80s. By comparison, these were youngsters. These were people in their 60s I was talking to generally. So I had a lot of experience just having very long-form discussions with people as a result of that. I'd say I also just learned the day-to-day diligence of doing a book, having a goal every day for what you needed to accomplish, whether it was during the writing period. I tried to write 1,500 words a day. If it was in terms of the research, I found ways to create benchmarks. Just never treating a day as anything more than just a work day for the book, I think helped me get it done fairly quickly. If you can write 1,000 or 1,500 words a day, in 2.5 months you have yourself a book. So that was kind of my approach.
And are you still you're teaching it, right?
I teach
still.
I teach part-time at a school called Norwich University. It's a small military college in Vermont, and I also freelance and write for a wide range of venues. A lot of them are city and regional magazines. Some of them are university magazines. Some of them are more national publications. And I pitch stories that are typically sports or popular culture related in one form or another.
So when you're pitching those stories, thinking about books, things like that, are those usually like college publications? Because you wrote about a lot of professional sports. Granted, we did have the tech angle and Pistol Pete, and the obvious flow from your NCAA football and basketball up to the pros in Loserville. What made you decide, hey, I'm going to write a whole book about college sports?
I think just getting the idea for the subject. I mean, I'm very broadly a sports fan. I'm probably the biggest football fan of anything, basketball probably second, but I'm willing to write about any sport. Basically, just I mean, as long as I can get paid to do it, I'm willing to write about pretty much any sport related topic. So in terms of this, I had a bit like I think my thing with books is I tend to talk about there's something that ends up having this range of unintended consequences, a big idea that builds off something seemingly small. I think that's what Loserville kind of does, that Atlanta had this vision that ended up shaping what's happening in the whole country. I think in some ways this is the same thing. You have these three ambitious young coaches who have a vision for building careers for themselves and end up in many ways playing a big role in the invention of March Madness. So I think that taking something small and building it into something big tends to be the kind of story I like telling.
Let me butt in here.
Yeah.
Have you noticed this anywhere else outside of your two areas of focus there between Loserville and the basketball?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, have you noticed that same trend of a smaller group trying to do that or being the source of a big expansion or change in a sport?
Yeah, I think that's how changes happen with most things. There's a handful of committed people that find a different way to do something, and they end up reshaping things, whether it's their intent or not. So I think, yeah, it happened with sports. I think it certainly happens in politics and society too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of like Malcolm Gladwell, kind of his whole gimmick as a writer is taking these seemingly small things that have these broader impacts.
Right.
He's not a guy I've read a ton of, but I think in some ways I do probably do some somewhat similar stuff to what he's doing in terms of at least structurally or narrative wise.
I think to build off of that too, it's and to bring it over to baseball, that's what you saw with Moneyball, right? The Oakland Athletics found a way to produce wins without having to spend money, and now everyone wants to do the exact same thing, and they were just doing it because they wanted to be cheap. Now it's a optimization game, right? Not just being cheap, but how can you spend money most optimally?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're pitching a book about sports, you want to tell them it's going to be the next Moneyball. Note that the word ball is in my title of this book. So I was very much thinking along those lines that you try to deal with an unfair game and find an advantage in it. So Loserville was going to be the next Moneyball. This one is too. I presume any book I ever write is going to be pitched as the next Moneyball. So I think that's an incredibly astute point in terms of what's happening. And I think as a marketing thing, it's also just the way to go because there really aren't that many sports books that sell that well anymore. There used to be a much bigger marketplace for it. So you have to find a way to say that you're the next big thing. And Moneyballs certainly was a big thing.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. And honestly, I've seen a lot of discourse with that being the 20th anniversary of Moneyball about how it's kind of changed not only sports, but also writing about sports and writing about the culture at large. So very interesting to hear to that perspective as well. I do want to talk a little bit about Boston. None of the three of us are Boston boys. I'm from Chicago. Akshay and Jack are Atlanta and ... elsewhere. What's the hook on Boston, not just in general, but what makes it forgotten? Because that's kind of what drew me to the title, it being a forgotten cradle of coaches.
Well, I think the main aspect of this is that Boston is basically a pro sports town. People will call it America's college town. It's not a college town in a conventional sense of the term. It's not like Madison, Wisconsin, where there's one college that dominates the landscape. You have a lot of different college, or Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Berkeley, California. You have a lot of different colleges in the city, whether it's Harvard or MIT or Tufts or BC or BU or Northeastern or Brandeis. You have a lot of very good schools in the city, but there's no one of them that is the dominant sports feature in the city. It is pro sports which dominates. At their best, college athletics are the fifth most popular thing in town, and there's rarely one team that really captures the imagination that way. BC football for a little bit in the 1980s, BC basketball when they had that run to the Elite Eight in the 90s, but generally speaking, it is the alumni of those particular schools who support those teams. I mean, college hockey is a very big deal in Boston, but even in Boston, it's still kind of a niche thing. So I think it's a lot of schools with relatively small fan bases fighting for table scraps in a market that's very much dominated by four pro sports teams.
That's interesting because as a Chicago native myself, I mean, I grew up in a town with 5 big sports teams, 5 pro leagues, but I wouldn't say that it was quite fractured the same way, and more that it was just like all these Big Ten, kind of like Atlanta, all these Big Ten grads moving, and probably the biggest Wisconsin town in America isn't Madison, it's Chicago or Michigan
State, and the biggest Notre Dame town
Illinois,
too,
Iowa,
yeah.
Whereas I mean, I'm a son of a DePaul grad and grandson of a Loyola grad, and I swam at UIC my whole life, but I mean, I wasn't hearing anything about any of those schools. So definitely an interesting perspective, and I'd say probably a relatable one, even again with Atlanta, with not just ACC schools and UGA, but the rest of the SEC is as well, like, from your Floridas to your Alabama schools and
that's a good point that you bring up too, and it's something that we brought up when we wrote our whole magnum opus on Georgia Tech's context, right? It's Georgia Tech is much like those small or those smaller Boston area colleges in that it's on the sports totem pole. There's the pro sports teams. There's the SEC, which might as well be 1A and 1B to a certain extent, or 1 and then 2, right? Yeah. For a lot of people. And then Georgia Tech and some of the other more minor college alumni fit in that third tier. So it's you can sort of see the parallels here between those two situations, as much as I hate to personally draw parallels between Boston and Atlanta, given Atlanta's history with Boston sports teams. But like you can see the parallels between these two stories here, and that it's super hard just to break through from that lower tier. And
very much so.
But like you say, it's like these guys did it, right? They brought something new to the table.
Yeah, they did. They were able to get a little more attention than they would have normally. In many ways, it's a story about the consequences of them all having the opportunity to build a program, build a culture. Because, I mean, people who saw UConn in the 90s become a dominant program, they would compare these guys who played at UConn directly to guys that had played for Northeastern during the 1980s. Oh, this is the new version of this guy. This is the new version of that guy. I mean, very quietly, Northeastern went to the tournament 6 out of 7 years with Calhoun. They scored 3 consecutive first-round upsets in a row. I mean, they built a very fearsome program that nobody wanted to play. I mean, they were one of the first Cinderellas in the tournament as it expanded from being a 24-team field to 32 to 48 to 54 to finally the 64-team bracket, which still makes up the core of the NCAA tournament. I mean, they were the team from the small conference nobody wanted to play. They were physical. They were fast. They crashed the boards, and people overlooked them year after year. I mean, on their locker room, it would say Northwestern on the outside because they thought that was the name of the school. One time Calhoun was coaching Northeastern and they had almost knocked off Villanova, who was a number 1 seed in 1983. Going back to the press conference at Nassau Coliseum in the Meadowlands in New Jersey, the security guard stopped him going to the press conference because they didn't realize he was the coach of a major basketball program. I mean, they very much treated these guys like they were small potatoes from all of these programs, even though they were accomplishing a great deal. I mean, in the early 80s, BC went to the Sweet 16 4 out of 5 years. They made it to the Elite 8 one time. BU had a tournament run as well in 1983. Despite being very low profile schools, they really did very well very quickly with these new head coaches.
Interesting. And I recall you saying, and you plugged it, I think twice now, right? Worked it in twice now, kind of the birth of March Madness. With that, you're saying, or positing in the book that they were part of like the growth of interest, or were they actively involved in expanding the tournament to 64 teams? Like where's the line there?
Well, I think they're more part of the generation of coaches that end up becoming the celebrity coaches that are part of the expansion of March Madness into something big. I mean, it was going to expand no matter what. I mean, I think really the growth of the Big East is what causes that. Putting teams in all these big money arenas, getting a contract with ESPN, and having these teams on television all the time is really what builds this regular season following that makes March Madness eventually possible. And BC is clearly the most underrated of those early Big East teams. They were the league champion 2 of the first 5 years of the conference, and they were in the Sweet 16 4 of those 5 seasons. So they held their own with the Georgetowns and Syracuses and Villanovas in this heavyweight conference.
I just read another book about Catholic college basketball that came out recently. Oh my goodness, it's on my
shelf.
John
Gasaway, Miracles on the Hardwood, one of my blurbs.
I was going to say, I I just read that, and the BC thing I feel like would have been in there, but it's not even ringing a bell. So that's good to know, because I as ACC fans, I feel like, I mean, we're one to talk maybe, but like BC isn't really seen as the daunting team on the schedule.
No, that's
say.
the obvious win on the schedule when you look at it in the last 15 years or so, ever since they got rid of Al Skinner. Certainly, I mean, BC's been very, very weak in basketball for a very long time. I mean, really, I think leaving the Big East in the first place was a bad idea for them. I think the ACC, in terms of football, was just really beyond where they've been capable of long term. I mean, they had some good years with Matt Ryan and stuff, but I think it may have
grateful
been
for that. We are very grateful for that.
Extremely grateful.
They beat us. No.
Very grateful.
Fans, knock that off. He beat us like 2 years in a row. No.
Look. Matt Ryan is the only athlete that transcends the ACC rivalry border for me. I will give him that much grace. Hall of Famer quarterback.
I got a random tidbit for you. Mm-hmm. Did you know that prior to the 2022-2023 season, Boston College, despite fielding like 30 plus ACC teams, had only won one conference championship total across all of those sports?
Really? Well, I mean, I think it's been a very difficult move for them. I think it's too bad what happened to the Big East more broadly, and I think they're in many ways got it going. I think Syracuse, BC, they belong in kind of their own league with these Northeastern schools. That, I mean, BC has nothing to do with NC State, has nothing to do with half of these schools in the ACC culturally. I mean, Georgia Tech, I think, actually makes more sense in some ways. It's a long-standing, highly competitive university kind of thing. In some ways, I can see a relationship between them, but kind of secondary state universities in the Mid-Atlantic region, they have nothing to do with Virginia Tech or any of those people. It's a very odd fit.
They shouldn't be playing Miami on the regular.
Clemson, noted secondary state school.
That is always very interesting when Clemson comes and plays at BC, seeing the clash of Southern football culture and Boston neighborhood culture. Like, Clemson fans are always confused that you can't just use the bathroom everywhere. It's like there's always 25,000 guys in orange who come up to Boston and they expect a pizzeria with 2 chairs. Like, can we come in and use the bathroom? Like, they just don't understand that, like, cities, Clemson, like what a city is like, these Clemson fans, generally speaking.
Oh, that's going to be a hoot with some listeners for sure. We're going to keep that one in.
They'll love it. I mean, I don't know.
Sometimes you need to rile people up for the listens. That's what all publicity.
And I have great admiration for Clemson's diehard support, because until the last 15 years, Clemson did not deserve the fan base they had. I mean, they've been great in recent times, but there were 20 years where Clemson was 7-5 all the time. They had a football fan base like they were winning the national title every year. Iowa's the same way in the Midwest. Like, they're never that great, but Iowa has this incredibly rabid fan base. Not to go too far afield, but to me, Iowa is sort of the Clemson of the Big Ten. But
that's just going to be the entire episode.
That's the episode title. Actually, Iowa is the Clemson of the Big Ten.
I will make that happen. We're not going to get better than that.
Talking Boston basketball, that's
going to be the subhead. Talking Boston basketball is going to be the subhead. All right, please get this train back on the road.
I'm going to tie it back. Just an oddball before I move on to one of my other questions on the list. I got to ask, before the time of these coaches, these programs were also seen as smaller or not as influential, correct? Like, do these coaches represent like an apex, or a sustained growth? Like, where are we looking at, like, before and after their tenures in Boston?
It depends on the school. At BU had been to the NCAA tournament exactly one time before Pitino got there. Out of nowhere, they got to the Elite Eight in 1959. Had never been to the tournament before that. Had never won a postseason game of any kind until 1980 with Pitino. So they were in Nowheresville as a basketball program. Northeastern was an excellent Division II program, what they used to call the college division in the 1960s. The Division II championship was always in Evansville, Indiana. They were there all the time, and they were excellent at that level. During the early 1970s, they transitioned to Division I, and it really takes them a number of years to get a hold of that. BC had some golden years early on, because like Bob Cousy had been their coach, Chuck Daly, who coaches the Pistons. Like, BC had some golden years in the 60s, but really fell off for much of the 1970s.
Gotcha. And honestly, it's interesting you bring up Evansville, because the first school I thought of Missouri Valley boy at heart was Evansville when you started talking about Northeastern being a big D2 program. So good to know there. Kind of moving on and tying it not only to Evansville but also Iowa and Clemson. What's the appeal of the book, you'd say, to Southerners like Jack, or like a Midwesterner turned Southerner like myself, college general sports fans? Like what's the overarching thing that you tell somebody to reel them in?
I would say it's an origin story for modern college basketball. If you want to know how the game evolved in the late 20th and early 21st century, in many respects, it's a product of what these coaches did. And their first crack at becoming head coaches was in Boston during the early 1980s. So it's the beginning point of everything you've come to know and love about modern college basketball. Maybe loathe, but I think for the most part, love. I mean, they've all been incredibly successful and built programs out of really nothing. And with nobody watching. I mean, these guys were having teams. BC was a little different. BC had a niche of 4,000 or 5,000 fans. They were literally BU games with 200 people in the stands. There was one time BU was playing a conference tournament game. They had like 300 people at it. Downstairs, BU was holding a celebration because BU's basketball arena was like a high school gym, basically, in a three-story building. The bottom floor was a hockey rink. 3 members of the Miracle on Ice team were BU guys, Mike Eruzione and Jim Craig being the 2 most prominent guys on the team. BU was holding a celebration to commemorate them. The celebration downstairs was drowning out the conference playoff basketball game that was happening upstairs at the time. After these guys had come and won a game to get to the conference finals, they come downstairs and there's 5,000 people hooting and hollering for the great American Olympic heroes. So like the seeming insignificance of what was happening at the time for these guys cannot be understated. They were a very small story in a lot of ways on campuses that were much more focused on almost everything else going on.
Gotcha. That's cool. Akshay, Jack, do you have anything else? Book, Boston, Loserville related?
I mean, I don't like Boston. That's my sports hate. It's just all directed right at them.
Is it because of the Patriots? Because nobody in Boston until 25 years ago thought the Patriots were from Boston. They were from this piddly-ass little town, Foxborough.
I understand. I understand that. But then I also understand they definitely you take it over when they're winning, though. Like you latch on. I mean, it was they were winning all the sports thing when the Sox and Bruins and Patriots were all simultaneously great. And we were,
to be clear, I will cop to it.
Wow, you're insulting our guest. Come on. They gave us their second baseball team. Come on. Be nice. It's a gift.
You got technically, it was Milwaukee's first baseball.
It was a secondhand gift, yes.
Yeah. It wasn't even for us in the first place.
Hey, it was almost the Athletics. People forget that.
The Braves, truly the fruitcake of the MLB, Isn't that the thing that always gets regifted? Yes.
But no, it's cool. I mean, following Boston sports is always just a unique thing for me, just because like a lot of it started there at all levels too. That's just where the core of a lot of the main stories start, and you can't do the histories, you can't think through where a lot of stuff comes from without touching Boston in a big way. So hearing more about this,
you realize Michael Jackson almost put the Patriots out of business.
Michael Jackson, the singer.
Michael Jackson almost put the Patriots out of business. In the mid-1980s, the owner of the Patriots' son, it was Patrick Sullivan, decided he was going to invest all of the family's money in a Jackson family reunion tour. It lost $100 million because Michael Jackson didn't appear on most of it. Michael Jackson got burned filming a Pepsi commercial, so Michael Jackson wasn't there. Wanted to go see Tito and Jermaine, you could, but they were charging Michael Jackson prices. So all of the family's fortune was gone. They played in the worst stadium in the league, and the Patriots nearly had to move. But instead, the family sold the team because of Michael Jackson. I mean, the Patriots were so small potatoes; it's tough to imagine during that time period. Wow. They were. If the Red Sox, Bruins, and Celtics were here, the Patriots are all the way down here and treated like maybe a Double-A baseball team.
That's the other part.
But then Robert Kraft bought them, and it all changed.
They were like weeks away from moving to St. Louis, if I remember correctly. Like they had the logos drawn up and everything.
Oh wow, really? Like for the St. Louis Patriots?
St. Louis Stallions.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. No, also the 2008 Hawks Celtics series. I know we were the 8th seed with a losing record, but still, getting in KG's face is one of my favorite things. Hey,
you had a losing record. You were lucky to be there. Come on.
I know, and we still took him to 7, baby.
Oh, Mr. Chicago, relax.
I didn't
Your
say
time will come
anything
at
about
some point.
Chicago. I didn't say anything about Chicago. We could talk about Celtics
Inevitably, we
Bulls.
find a way. Inevitably, we find
Anyways,
a way.
keeping it civil, because that's my goal here as the interviewer. Clayton, I got to ask, what's next after book 2? Have you started book 3 yet?
Oh, I've been going back and forth with my agent for a while now about a topic. And eventually we'll come up for it. I assume it'll be another like little thing, little engine that makes something big, or fails to make something big. We'll see. I'm still, I haven't started writing it yet. I've been doing a lot of just freelancing stuff just to make a little cash for the most part in the last year or two on the side. But yeah, I plan to write a third book, and hopefully until I die, I keep writing them.
Nice.
Hey, that sounds awesome. I gotta say, if you ever have any need to come back and, talk about a third book, you're always welcome on the podcast here. But in the meantime, where can everyone find you? Where can everyone find the book? Links, publishers,
Sure.
all that good
If
stuff.
if you head on over to Twitter, I'm at Clayton Trutor, ClaytonTrutor. I'd love to be your friend on Facebook. Just look up Clayton Trutor. In terms of buying Loserville, you can find it on Amazon, steeply discounted right now. Just type in Loserville. There's some, I guess, teen drama that came out like 7 years ago called that. If you see an angsty teenager on the cover, that is not me. I'm the one with a picture of an empty Atlanta stadium. Is my Loserville. Boston Ball is available for pre-order now. You can go to bit.ly/Boston Ball to check out the book on the publisher's website. You can save 40% on the book using promo code 6AF23. 6AF23 bit.ly/Boston Ball, 40% off. I think it ends up being like $19 at that point, which is, like a dinner date to Applebee's, I guess. So I think it's well worth your time. And if you buy a copy, DM me and I'll send you a signed book plate thanking you for your time and the money.
Dang. Well, I'm sure all of them that listen to this fine podcast will have to go check it out. I know I can't wait to give it a read. The first one was a page turner, and I know we're all excited for the second one. Other thing we're excited for on this fine podcast is section103.com. Section 103 is Georgia Tech's finest purveyor of soft and wearable Georgia Tech apparel. I'm back in my Section 103 this week after a home run derby related hiatus. Last week, the THWG shirt is truly one of my favorites. It fits great. It wears great. It's very soft. You really can't go wrong with any of it. Last week, Joey mentioned the Juniors Grill shirt, and I mentioned the North Avenue Trade School Seal shirt. This week, I am going to plug the Tech Zip hoodie because that is in my closet. It's probably the thing I wear the most outside of my everyday work clothes and that kind of thing. And you can find it and so much more great Georgia Tech stuff at section103.com. Keep an eye out there into this coming season for all the latest and greatest gold, white, official GT logos and all that from section103.com and at section103 on Twitter. Gents, you've had me do a lot of talking tonight. I don't usually steer the episodes, but before we go, I'm going to get in one more because even though there is not much news, history trivia stops for no one. With Clayton on this week, he requested a Pepper Rogers related question. So on the fly, I found one. I think it's pretty interesting. So without further ado, I'll set it up. For those that don't know, Pepper Rogers was Georgia Tech's quarterback when he was a student and an athlete, and then he became, after some winding times around, as an assistant at Air Force Florida and UCLA, and head coach at Kansas, and again at UCLA, the head coach at Georgia Tech. He coached at Georgia Tech for 6 seasons. In the process, he managed a probably, almost certainly, unrepeatable feat, almost more often associated consistency-wise with Chan Gailey. Does anyone know what this record-related feat was?
Before anyone gives an answer, I want to make sure that we note one thing. Did you just Pepper Rogers explain it? What is probably an audience that is pretty well versed in Pepper Rogers?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
It's someone's
Every
first
podcast
podcast.
is someone's first.
It's always someone's first.
Boo,
Are you
don't use
gatekeeping Pepper Rogers?
Come
I'm
on,
not
let's do this.
gatekeeping anything. I'm just saying you should expect more of our listenership. I'm advocating for the audience.
We're an open tent, Akshay. We want to bring people in. Sidewalk fans are good. We don't want any celebrations drowning out our conference tournament basketball games. So,
Oh boy.
that would require us having a hockey team, I guess, but I can dream. Anyways, you guys are welcome to ask any clarifying questions you want. I recommend you work together because you're probably not just going to randomly guess it unless you're really confident, in which case go ahead. But which record related, and it's related to consistency, feat over Pepper Rogers' 6 seasons did he accomplish? Oh, and this is regular season records. I'm not counting
And you said it was Gailey related.
Purdue.
I have a thought on this.
Clayton, I want to hear it.
They were always kind of like 6 and 5-ish. I think it's going to be like most consecutive 6 and 5 seasons.
I don't think that you're on the wrong path. It's not just 6 and 5, though they did go 6 and 5. Let me see, in 2 of his seasons. It is related to consistency in that record, though. I'll give you guys like 2 more guesses because it's so close. It's almost
like 5 lost seasons specifically.
Nope. It is tied to his record. Akshay, do you want to give it one more guess? Otherwise, I'll throw it out there.
You said it was Chan Gailey related, so it has to be something having to do with hovering right around 500.
Yes.
And I'm going to assume that it is like the longest streak of like either 500 seasons or hovering right around 500 seasons pre-Chan Gailey.
You know what? I'm going to give y'all the collective credit because Clayton, you got close. Akshay, you added, I think, an important little nuance because it's not 6 and 5 all in a row. I do want to be clear about that. What it is Pepper Rogers managed the almost unrepeatable feat of having the exact same regular season record for 3 seasons in a row repeat. So he went 6 and 5. And then the next year in 1975, he went 7 and 4. And then the next year he went 4 and 6. And then in his 4th year, he went 6 and 5.
Yep.
And then he went 7 and 4 with a bowl loss to Purdue in the Peach Bowl. And then he went again 4 and 6 and 1. Sorry, 1976 was 4 and 6 and 1 in case I only said 4 and 6. But yes, so Pepper Rogers posted the exact same record pattern of 3 seasons again in a row.
Oh, there's no way that's ever going to be repeated. The probability of that is extremely low.
Yes.
Hey, we just get.
I feel like Kansas could go 0 and 12, 1 and 11, 2 and 10, and then go back to 0 and 12. I feel like they would be capable of this.
Another Pepper Rogers former team. There you go.
Yeah.
But yes, I made that up on the fly, which I think found that out on the fly, which not made it up because obviously it existed and it's been there that way for 50 years,
good,
but
yeah.
Not bad. Couple other Pepper Rogers facts for you. For those who don't go diving into his stats all the time, it's worth noting he was 522 overall with that 34, 31, and 2 record. Against current ACC teams, he went 10, 8, and 1 for a 553 win percentage, including multiple wins and no losses against UVA and Miami, also going 1-0 against FSU. He was not very good against Duke or Pitt or Clemson. He went 1-2-1. He went 9, 13, and 1 against current SEC teams, including 3 and 3 against Auburn, 2 and 4 against the school in Athens, and 2 and 3 against South Carolina. Yeah.
You've also forgotten one important record for him. He's also 0 and 1 versus the state of Georgia.
Oh,
in
lawsuits.
Thank you.
Boy.
Thank you. I'm actually, I had to fire that off before I confirmed who actually ran the lawsuit. So,
I think that should be the name of the episode.
0 and 1 versus the state of Georgia.
State of Georgia.
Man, I thought I might get something out of the fact that he beat Notre Dame, but then I realized he also lost to Notre Dame 5 times, and I was like, that's not going to make for.
He lost the Rudy game. The reason there's a Rudy movie is because of Georgia
he's
Tech.
the guy.
Yeah.
He's the coach for that game. Okay.
Speaking of Notre Dame and Georgia Tech, Clayton, did you know that what's his name? Frank Leahy?
Frank Leahy.
Yeah. You know, he almost died on the sidelines in a Tech Notre Dame game.
Really? How?
Yeah. He was not doing so good, I guess. He kind of old, and they brought in a priest to read him his last rites and everything. So, but he didn't die. So, wild.
That
Georgia
would be
Tech
a really
back for you.
dramatic halftime.
Yes, but that's
That
why
would be
that's
even
why
better
I brought
than
it
one
up.
for the Gipper. Yeah.
I was going to say you got a lot of legendary Notre Dame drama, but that might take the cake, and almost no one knows about it. So there you go.
I do have to issue a small correction. It was Pepper Rogers' lawsuit was not against the state of Georgia. It was versus specifically the Georgia Tech Athletic Association because it is a private entity and not a school, which would have been public and referred to the university system of Georgia.
Dang it.
0-1 versus the state of Georgia should be a #1 country song.
That does sound like
but the problem is where it would be recorded, mixed, and distributed from, which is something that we can't abide by.
I gotta say one more thing, just to bring it home on the Frank Lee thing. Notre Dame won that game. They were the #1 team in the country. So even though their coach almost died in the middle of it, they did win that football game. So,
and Frank Leahy coached at Boston College. And the BC Notre Dame trophy is called the Frank Leahy Trophy.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And BC takes that rivalry incredibly seriously, and Notre Dame treats it as being roughly like Purdue or something. It's fairly low on their list of major games.
That makes sense.
That Frank Leahy game was the first loss Georgia Tech had in quite some time. Actually, they were 4-1 going into that game in 1953, and you might know 1952 as the year in which they went undefeated and untied and to win a national title.
So Pepper Rogers played in that game because Pepper Rogers was there in the early 50s. Okay.
Yeah.
He's just Forrest Gump, isn't he?
Yep. 1951, they also did not lose a game. They were untied. So that was their first loss since November 18th, 1950. So there you go. A lot of history today, but it's the middle of summer. And so I'm going to indulge myself. I think that's all I've got. Gents, have I forgotten anything?
No.
Akshay is shaking his head no
There was only 3 pieces of news this week, and they were just, hey, these guys showed up. So
yeah, we might have another
it's a slow
interview
period.
Next week. TBD. We're working on that, and by that I mean I'm working on that. I will. If there's an interview next week, everyone will be like, "Oh, Jake did it," and if he didn't, it's not my fault. Blame someone else.
We could have an all Clemson episode. I could come on and talk Clemson for an hour.
Oh my goodness.
Oh man, I don't know how that would go, but we can always dream. With that being said, I will bring us out. Clayton, before we go, tell us one more time where we can find you and your fine books and what you're up to.
Okay, thank you guys all for a fun evening. I'm Clayton Trutor. My Twitter handle is at ClaytonTrutor, at Clayton Trutor on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to find Loserville, it's available for a nice price on Amazon right now, which is my Atlanta book. My new book, Boston Ball, is available for pre-order. If you go to bit.ly/Boston and you use the promo code 6AF23, you can get 40% off the cover price and pay well under $20 for it. And I'll be happy to send you a signed book plate thanking you as well.
Hey, I can't wait for my signed book plate, Clayton. Anyways, you can find us at fromtherumbleseat.com. As always, you can email us fromtherumbleseat@gmail.com. We don't have a lot of open dates left, but it's the summer. We want to make sure that when we have this time, are talking about what you all want to hear, whether it's more interviews or specific topics or history. We've got some few ideas in the works, but pretty soon we will be in football preview time and volleyball preview time, as this is a volleyball podcast primarily. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter at FTRS blog. I'm at Jake Grant 98. Jack is at Jack Nicholas. You can find Section 103 at Section 103 as well. Remember, section103.com. Free shipping on orders over $70. And then on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, you can find us at From the Rumble Seat. You can find us over the airwaves, wherever fine podcasts are distributed. Good night. Good luck. Thanks again, Clayton, and go Jackets.